As it says there, case study on a garden variety chiller replacement at 120 Collins Street, and BIM isn't my background or my forte. I'm a facilities manager. I came from the construction industry for the first part of my career, and I've been in FM for about the last 10 years. So I've seen both sides of the coin, and I've been working with Mike for the last probably 18 months or so, and also Chris Needham, who's up shortly in this BIM space, because really it's quite interesting. But from what I've heard over the last day and a half so far, it's all about the FM. It's all about the FM, the FM, the FM, and he's like this mystery character. And this is the FM. Most of them, they might have a bit more hair at times, but either way. So we thought it was a good opportunity to really talk about what we're doing at 120 Collins Street and Investa as a business. So just a bit of context. I'm not sure if people know who Investa is, but we're Australia's largest commercial office owner and manager, only commercial office. So we don't have industrial, residential, it's purely commercial office. 120 Collins Street's 65,500 square metre premium grade property up at the Spring Street end of Collins there. We've got about 44 properties around Australia, a mixture of A and premium and some Bs, and that equates to about 1 million square foot of net lettable area. So it's a sizable, it's like a hospital I suppose, but bigger and spread out across the country. So really, we're probably really well positioned to see how interesting this can be for us. This one up here, forward, reverse, that's good. So, just for a bit of context, project overview. So this was just an end-of-life chiller replacement, that's it, not too fancy or beautiful, I suppose, but it's a chiller that needed replacing. So we thought, why not try this BIM workflow or this BIM thing in an existing building? So, been working with AECOM and Chris Needham and the Lyon group on a new development, 567 Collins Street, and that's really working the BIM flow in a new build, which is great, but what about existing? And we've heard a bit of that. I was actually quite excited to hear Dennis's talk this morning about Denver Airport, because that's a bit sad. That was quite exciting. I'm not sad, we're all sad, we all enjoy that sort of stuff, that's great. Existing buildings, you look out in the city, how many cranes do you see compared to how many buildings are sitting there? It's a no-brainer, and that's where we really need to be heading towards. Investors committed to BIM not only in new developments, it's a mandate for all new developments as it appears to be for Dexus, which is great, but we're also committed to trialling it to see how we can crack the nut for existing assets and what that means for us. So 120 Collins Street is a bit of a pilot project for us in that regard. So it's not just a chiller replacement, we're also working on base building refurbishment works. All our base building services are being captured as we sort of work on.
The basic approach we took in this was actually trying to work out, and I think a couple of speakers have already said that already today, looking at the end point, where we want to get to, and then work backwards and sort of aim towards that end point. So what we sort of brainstormed up was a sort of a different take on a traditional procurement method for a chiller replacement. I guess if you think about a traditional way of doing it, the consultant would come in, find some old PDFs, sort of replicate them with a sort of a CAD drawing or a model nowadays, produce some drawings, get that out to tender, and get back a built chiller installation and get some as-built drawings, and then it would all be put in a pile in the side, and everyone would move on to the next project. This is a little bit different, not the sense that the actual works that are happening are any different, but the thinking around the whole process is really what differentiates this as a slightly different approach. BIM aiming towards an end point, an end goal. So if you look at today's talk is really just trying to tackle what we broke down into 6 stages, into 3 different phases: a pre-construction phase, a construction phase, and a post-construction phase. And we're just going to work through that in this little talk.
So, starting at the end, which it's actually been quite good that all the talks to this point have all said, look at the end before you start at the beginning. So we got that right. That's
so far we're doing
all right.
So
far. We've still got 5 more stages. Yeah. So this is not of one of our building management offices, but this is really, it's not a secret. Sometimes we have difficulty controlling our documentation. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So really, at the end of the day, that's what we're aiming towards. Having this end goal in mind defines all of the processes before it, clearly, but some of the thinking that came out of these sessions was, it's not just going to be a valuable tool for me to manage a facility, it's a valuable tool for the people managing the property and for the property owners as well. You know, it's those little incremental things that we can leverage. So some of the stuff we brought out of our structural model was a floor area that we can use for marketing information. If a tenant wants to see a floor plate, there you go, high quality documentation we can hand straight over with the compactor zones as an example. My aspiration is to see that used for NLA surveys that get attached to leases as well. We'll have that information and all that data, all that sitting there. Why can't someone else use it? So these are all things that fed into our critical brainstorming there. The right data or the right information available to the right people. I think the key to this comment is giving access, or giving people access to information that they wouldn't normally have as part of their regular role. You know, so it's not just being the FM sitting in a basement or in a messy office with, you know, he's got the information up here. You know, we've heard a lot about, you know, the construction or design data gets transferred to construction, gets transferred to as-built, gets transferred to the FM, your beauty, but there's still a whole other area that gets involved in the ongoing life cycle and operation of an asset. That's an absolute no-brainer. Single searchable database, much easier than having 500 disparate systems, and a single point of truth. And the knowledge management tool, which we've also referred to. So I had to work a bike into this because Mike and I have got a bit of a history of riding bikes. It's actually how we
vote now if you want.
Let's have a vote. Who likes riding bikes? Yeah,
bring
that's
it
good.
up.
We're amongst peers. That's great. So what I'm going to not so gracefully get to here is this is a picture of a bike, or this is a picture of a model. This is a model, and I believe it's all a sense of how you look at this. Because everybody in the room looks at the same thing, but we've all got different lenses that we view this information through or the model through. What's abundantly clear is the consultants have got a different view of what it is to what the contractors have got, to what the FM does, or what the owners of the actual asset do themselves. But the end goal is it's a model or a data set that fundamentally supports the FM service delivery. You know, and that's the real key. At the end of the day, the first driver will be how you build a building, but ultimately it supports FM service delivery. And so that's the same thing, but viewed from the side. This is in Milan, apparently. It's not one of my holiday photos, but you know, I wish it was, but when you view it from the front, you know, it's all a sense of perspective.
I guess with that end view of BIM for FM integration as an endpoint, and trying to link data to the models and to the entire process, we started at some sort of beginning. What was the existing documentation that we had? We had a series of PDFs, some drawings that were, I believe, from around 1991, or some of the existing documentation, which wasn't terribly inaccurate, but it was literally just a scanned PDF. So something we'd done a little bit of in some of the existing plant rooms that we'd been working on was to go in and point cloud scan them. We've already heard all about that. It's exactly what we did. We went in and got AAM to go in and do a point cloud scan of this level 52 plant room that's getting the replacement chiller. Then we went through and did it manually. We didn't use ClearEdge 3D. We did it manually. You can see there the pipework, the chillers that we model as existing conditions. So we went through, we used the BIMMAP Oz pipework to generate the actual existing conditions pipework, using the existing knowledge that we had from the PDFs to give us the pipe size. Then we added the insulation based on the point cloud scan that gave us that accurate data. And you can see in there plinths, and that sort of existing level of documentation was sort of established as a starting point. In addition to that, we really started thinking about who is going to use this model in the upcoming stages of the project, and what sort of information are they going to contribute to that project, and what sort of level of detail are they going to go to as they refine that model. And that initial stage was really that thinking, that original, no, it's all right, you can go stages already, that's all right. No, you're just trying to push me along, that's all right. That whole process of how we're going to think through this whole staged process started really coming into that stage one. Stage two, the existing conditions model, the existing point cloud, and anything that we'd produced as an existing document was handed over. So we had the existing model that was handed over to the designers, AECOM. We'd also created a structural model of the building based on existing documentation, which was pretty accurate. And then we also handed over that point cloud scan that we'd based our model on. And then we started having these discussions with each of the parties, as you'll see as we go through the whole process, basically setting out the expectations and outlining our stage 6 with this idea in the future where this model is going to be linked to data. We want to be building on that process as we go along. So the stage 2 proposed design modelling is effectively from the existing conditions through into the designer's realm, the consultant's traditional realm. And once again, our expectations were we've started this model using the BMO template. We expect you to continue using that. This is our standard. This is what we're doing. The other thing that we really need to make sure of was whatever data you put into that model has to be consistent with the paper output. Whatever comes out on the drawings and the 2D has to come from the model. This data has to have some integrity to it. We also hosted the project on Autodesk 360 to give all parties access to those models, to those point clouds, so that data was available. Nathan, how'd you go with that point cloud that I gave you?
Yeah, it was point cloud was quite interesting.
Oh,
it was
good to hear.
The processed image. But I mean, when I started shopping that around inside the office, it's all about socialising what we're trying to achieve here, and I'll put it bluntly, it blew people's minds. You know, if you don't see this stuff every day, when I first got hold of it, and you can walk through the processed image. You think, why? Why not? Why would you not? It's so simple. It's, you know, night and day. And this is a bit of a hero shot. This is part of the reason that we started expanding our model, aside from a receptacle to start locating some of our floor-by-floor base building refurbishments. It was something to house the model in. A visualisation tool for everybody, really.
Yep. The next stage is the traditional stage where the documents are handed over to tenderers, in this case mechanical contractors, to tender on the final price of the project. Now at this stage I would say is when things would normally go a little bit off track, because what we found was that the traditional methods of project management don't really take into account the detail that's required on handing over a Revit model and all the associated information that goes along with that. So we went through a process in stage 3 of just going with CBRE, who was the nominated project manager for the project, and to actually set aside and be really clear about what those contractual requirements are for the modelling as it goes through the next couple of stages. This is a really short snapshot in the image there of what the specific requirements were of each of the contractors, and they had to make sure that that was part of their return price, that kept that the integrity of our modelling that had been done up to date, that was going to be handed over once the winning contractor was awarded. This is what they had to comply with. Once again, BIM-EPOS was specified, and this is where it started getting a little bit more interesting with the data. And Nathan already had experience with data usage with Kobe, and at this point I'll hand over to Nathan to talk about how we were going to start including the Kobe data from this point onwards.
Only very briefly, I suppose, whether it needs to be spoken about more in detail later on, but part of leveraging the work that we've done, so we don't have a BIM budget, if there is such a thing, so really we wanted to put in as minimal amount of money as we needed to at this point to get the maximum benefit at the other end. And so part of this process was, you know, a quite extensive process that Chris Needham and myself, more so Chris, me for comedic relief, went through to really deconstruct the Kobe data schema and say, well, what's really relevant? Do we need 500 tabs of everything and anything, or is it just data for data's sake? Because as Chris quite clearly pointed out a number of times, the more you've got, the more someone's going to have to maintain. And, you know, we don't want to maintain too much, so let's just boil it down to the bare necessities. So a lot of the work was done on another project, and we managed to you get the leverage off that work that was already done and import it into this project.
The other thing that we did was to provide the TrueView viewable scan to all of the tenderers. The intention with this is to start de-risking that tendering process, to give the tenderers as much information as they can, as we can give them, to allow for as much understanding of the project scope as possible. We also handed out a Navisworks model that was used for the tenderers. So we haven't handed over the raw Revit files or the raw point clouds. We've handed over extractions of that information to get a really accurate tender price and to take out some risk from the client's point of view of what they're going to receive back, because there's no misunderstandings about what's involved in the project.
One of the interesting points that came up as we were talking about handing a model or handing information out, particularly heavily detailed information, is the question about security. And because it is, like the Ninja that we saw earlier today, that just as well they were following an inaccurate model, so they came out in the laneway, but that is a whole nother sector that does need a lot of consideration, is how do you start controlling and regulating who gets what and how they, it's just something that for those others within our business do have some concern over.
And that in itself, that thinking is different to a consultant's thinking, who might look at the simplest way to set up a model. When we start looking at the overall model possibilities for this building, I think we started looking at potentially 500 separate models, because we're thinking about it in the way that the FM wants to work with it, not necessarily the consultant or the contractor. It's thinking from the client's own point of view.
Oh, that's good. Start at the end.
Now, in this case, AG Coombs was the winning contractor. And so the next stage was that handover of information and expectation to Coombs. We've had those meetings. In terms of where we're up to, we're actually up into this stage 4 now. Right now is our current stage. Once again, that talk, that conversation about what the expectations of this model are, keeping in mind stage 6, the future. Excuse me, and at this stage, that model was handed over. The model that came back from ACOM, I verified it as part of my role. I checked it, I made sure it was all good. Has it complied with our expectations? Yes, it did. We handed it over. And a similar process is going to happen once you start looking at stage 5 with the model that comes back. At this point, the existing point cloud was handed over. That's part of the information that's required. The design Revit model was handed over. The structural model was handed over. Once again, confirming BIM/FS Oz expectations. And the spreadsheets that were needed to be part of that data were also handed over at this point. And that was the discussion, and that is the difference in terms of how the procurement was happening in this particular case is at every stage, especially with CBRE, their involvement and their ratification and confirming of the contractual requirements involves all of these elements. It's not just something that sort of says a little line in a spec that says you need to use BIM. It's got to be really specific, and I think that's where, as we went along the process, it started fleshing out where particular parties hadn't actually done this before, and that was quite exciting to be part of that process.
I think and it's been spoken about as well, and it's very common sense, but sometimes common sense doesn't actually eventuate into reality. But sitting around a table with the guys from Coombs and ARUP and myself, talking about what we wanted to achieve, and even the explanation about why we wanted to achieve that as an outcome, added some clarity around why the effort was going to be put in the first instance. Because, like we looked at that picture of the bike before, everybody was sort of looking at a part of it, but not everybody may have been looking at it front on to see what it actually was going to be intended for.
Now the future. So the next stage of the model and the actual work on site will be the fact that as part of the contract, there will be an as-built model that comes back from Coombs. I've already seen evidence that they're more than willing to use the as-constructed modelling, the constructability modelling that's all been talked about in these last 2 days. That model will contain COBie formatting. Here's an example of Nathan's spreadsheet. And then we're going to do some auditing just to make sure that it's all consistent. And then the final part of the puzzle in terms of this stage is to then do a second point cloud scan and do some verification so that as-built model can be trusted for future generations. We don't have a piece of PDF documentation sitting somewhere in a file. We have a live model that is up to date.
I mean, the real key with that is it's reliability on data, and it's been covered off a number of times over the last couple of days. But if you need to establish a level of trust within what you've got, so you've got to be clear in your expectations and clear in what your execution is going to be. Otherwise, you just don't trust it, and you've wasted a lot of time and a lot of effort.
Absolutely.
Challenges to date. We're nearing the end of this now. We had a few, and we still have a few, and I'm sure there's going to be some more. But the main underlier was new work processes for all parties, except for ARUP, because he's a modelling leader. And until I knew what modelling was, I always wanted to know if he'd done any catalogues recently. I could never understand why he was a leader of a modelling crew. I'm an oil painting, of course, but you know. It was a new work process for me because I was a client. It was a new work process for our client PM, so our client-side project manager, which is CBRE. The particular project manager we've got on this is an extremely proficient project manager with a massive range of experiences, but he's willing to learn and willing to take it all on board, but you could still see the cogs ticking as to why. You know, the question was asked that many times, but they're going to have to measure. They're going to have to measure. We say, well, no, we've got this scan. We've got a point. We've got this scan here that you can take the measurements off. Yeah, but you'd still want to check. But so you can sort of, and he's coming around, but you can just see where that gap in experience and gap in trust might potentially be. One of the, had a bit of a discussion with Mike before, but you know, it's a warts and all, I suppose.
Well,
one of the things,
I think I've got one here.
Oh, I'll stand over here then. My utopian view of it was we were going to hand over this fantastic high quality package of documentation, which included a scan, a model, give them raw points if they want. They should be able, they'll have unfettered access to whatever information they need that we have to get, you know, to de-risk the process. Same construction principles, you know, de-risk the process, assurance on the prices that are being returned, the quality of the proposals that are coming back, but all tendering parties turned up with a tape measure and a camera. And, you know, some of the comments that I got back from the estimating teams were, yeah, we don't have a computer that will run that. You know, and well, it's for the point cloud, for the viewer, it's a HTML. You know, I can almost run it on my work computer if our IT had a brain in their head. But anyway,
are they here today?
I've got to go sit on my hot desk. I can't do it from my desktop. I don't understand. But that for me was eye-opening, but it was disappointing as well. So what I suppose it shows is that while an organisation in a construction, in a new build space they might love it. It might be what floats their boat. They might be writing the book on it, but in an estimating capacity or in a slightly other area of the business, and that's not just contractors, that's consultancy firms as well, it may not necessarily have filtered across. So the experience that I get as a client, if I wasn't pig-headed and really want to see this succeed in this sort of a siloed instance, I might just say, oh, what a waste. They don't actually want to look at it in the first place. Why am I bothering spending this money? But, you know, we'll get there. When they realise how valuable the information was, you know, I think it was quite good. But like Victor said yesterday, I don't think I saw any cost benefit to having this. I've got cost certainty, but I don't think I saw a reduced cost in the proposals that came back, because it's probably still fairly foreign in the context that we're talking about for contractors and consultants to be working. The prices came back extremely, you know, extremely close, which was great because they must have all been measuring off the same or singing off the same hymn sheet. But hopefully the next time, as things become more and more commonplace, I'll start seeing a cost benefit.
Well, I think part of our reason we really want to share this is that, as far as I'm concerned, this is not proprietary information. This should be common practice, I think, in any sort of existing building, any kind of existing refit, starting with a solid starting point with a existing conditions model and working through, including the real requirements of that modelling right through to the end, and leaving it open at the end so that it actually is available information for future FM developments. And that's part of that thinking long-term point. There's all sorts of issues at the moment potentially with, you know, FM, BIM, all of these different aspects. There's lots of challenges, and some of the software limitations will go away. So we're trying to not stumble over our own feet. We're trying to produce something that will be useful for the long term, hence post-installation scanning, hence, you know, getting 3D information we can rely on and be confident about. One of the real questions that always gets asked is how far do we go? This is a challenge. Every single project, this needs to be discussed. Where are the benefits going to be? Who's going to put that information in there? And who's going to get the benefit? It's a discussion. And I think one of the things that really stood out in this whole process was the amount of discussions that needed to happen right along the process. Some people might call it hand-holding, I don't. It's actually real thinking changing that needs to happen.
That's not to say there wasn't any hand-holding.
No,
Some of the meetings were quite long. But just, just chairs slide closer. No, Jay, one of the rules that we applied in one of our hand-holding sessions was
Coffee.
a lot of coffee.
Yeah.
But for an FM, if someone says to an FM, how much information do you want? They'll probably say, oh, I'll have it all, thanks. I'll just give it all. What do you need it for? I'll find it. One time you're going to ask me for something and I'm going to need that information that you didn't give me now, so just give it to me. But the rule, I suppose, from an owner's perspective, if we had a tenant that wanted to fit out space, we gave them a nice model and they still insisted on doing their documentation in CAD, we would have to do that conversion ourselves. So how far into our pocket would we be willing to dip to get those drawings converted, for example? And that's when you start boiling it down to what do we actually need? That's just an anecdotal way that I would measure it, but there's a lot of other ones that can be applied. But yeah, it's our business sees the potential in it as an owner-manager, but it's trying to reach a realistic outcome without over-committing and over-promising and making life too difficult for the FMs that we have.
Yeah. And I guess that's the approach, not just this project, but other projects at 120. It's incremental, it's project-based, building up to a long distance future of an entire building being accurately modelled and managed by the facility. We've hit 26 minutes and 39 seconds.
That's good enough.
I think we're done.
That's a PR.
Yeah.
That's good. A PB. Good. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening.